Good morning. And I'm deeply, deeply impressed that you all made it that early in the morning. So I guess for once we all agree that we are early. I'm very happy to be joined on stage to discuss autonomous art before and after the agent with Jordan from Art Blocks. And I guess we agree that the platform changed how we look at generative art. Then Primavera, who was one of the first people to think about blockchain and DAOs. And I recently reread an article from her. I think it's from an essay from 2018. And she predicted like pretty much what actually happened. I was also deeply impressed. And then Jonas Lund, who you might know from the Jonas Lund token. Maybe you're also part of the DAO. And he recently started an exhibition with actually an empty room and then handed things over to an agent. So, and let's get the first question out of the way, which when people discuss AI agents, I often hear them say, well, it's not actually autonomous. So how do you as artists and builders, Jordan, how do you define autonomy when it comes to art? And has that changed after you've started working with agents?
My first, you probably want to hear from the artist first, but I'll jump in. Not an artist, but I'm a builder, long-time collector and builder in this space. Representing Art Blocks, I'm the chief product officer, helping the team, grow the platform and helping amazing artists release on the platform. When I think about autonomy, kind of even before the headlines of AI agents and before it was anything that everybody was talking about, the history of generative art, a lot of examples of autonomy, especially when we launched Art Blocks, which way back in 2020, Eric and Jeff, who's in the audience, saw the vision of what could be generative art on chain. And everything that was released there was some element of autonomy. So even before we started talking about agents and AI was in the picture, generative art is all about building the rule set, building a system, and letting the magic take over. So it was something that we've been kind of living with, as you guys know, for years now, decades even, if you think about it. So it really hasn't changed too much around autonomy, and for me, it's about helping facilitate the artist's vision, their narrative, and sometimes that means, paintbrush to canvas. Sometimes it means writing an algorithm. Sometimes it means deploying an AI agent. So it's various, flavors of kind of the same thing, in my opinion.
Thank you. Primavera, for you as an artist?
Yeah, so as an artist, I guess my main trajectory is to try and create new life forms. So obviously autonomy is quite part of the picture. And but what I was initially the most interested in was, so there's this important distinction, I guess, between operational autonomy and decisional autonomy. Operational autonomy is the ability to operate without being dependent for someone else to ensure your operations. Whereas decisional autonomy is the ability of actually making decisions on your own without other telling you what to do, or without other being able to influence you in some ways. And so to me, when I was thinking about how do we build synthetic life forms, operational autonomy seemed the most important, because when you think about life, the most early form of life are actually quite simple. They don't have like very sophisticated thinking, but they are operationally autonomous, like little cells, little amoebas, etc. So I was very interested in how do we create the most basic synthetic life form, and obviously blockchain technology was one of the most fundamental part of operational autonomy. So for a long time I didn't think much about AI, because I was not so interested in creating synthetic life forms that are smart. And so most of my work was operational autonomy. I want to make something that has the ability to reproduce, the ability to evolve, the ability to metabolize by interacting with the environment, and trying to not simulate, because the goal is not to recreate or try to simulate something that exists in the organic form, but to actually design new metabolism that operate on top of blockchain technology. And then, of course, at some point when you start getting attached to those little creatures, you want them to be also a little bit autonomous at the decision making. And so I started, of course, also injecting more AI into those creatures. But as an artist interested in life and synthetic life, I would say that I think operational autonomy is a precondition. So you need things, if you want them to be alive, they have to have their own ability to interact and live into the world. And then decision autonomy is like, of course, even better. But if you only have decision autonomy, so if you only have like an AI agent that is actually running on a corporate computer, and that if you shut down the computer, it's off, it's autonomous at the decision level, but it has absolutely no operational autonomy. As a creator of life forms, I would not wish that for any of my creatures. So I give much more importance, at least, as the substrate of operational autonomy, and then figuring out ways in which you can add a little bit of decisional autonomy on top.
Thank you, and I guess we'll hear more about that later. Jonas?
Yeah, I was thinking about it. Hello, everybody, first of all. Nice to be here. Nice to see so many friends, including many Jonas Lund token holders. It's great representation. I was thinking about autonomy, and then I was thinking, what am I going to say? And then I decided to just start talking to see if my autonomous talking would fill in the gaps. So I think of it as, in my work, I set up a lot of different semi-autonomous systems, rules, performances, structures. And I think of autonomy as like as a gradient. Like, it's not fully autonomous, it's not fully like non-autonomous autonomy, but then it also very much depends in which context, right? So I feel agency over my practice in deciding what works I make. I don't feel full agency over how it gets contextualized, how it gets transported in the network, how it gets absorbed by a massive art world network. There you feel like you get less and less autonomy, and then where your career goes and how it develops, possibly. But it's a very interesting thing because we exist in lots of structures and systems where we have very little autonomy, where the power asymmetry is very complete. So I think it's on some sort of strange gradient.
And speaking about the Jonas Lund token, I remember when you started the project, and by the way, Jonas was also the person who made me open my first wallet. And I remember sitting in my living room, and I thought I had acquired something physical, and then he said, I want to transfer you some token. It's like, okay. And then he was like, download this thing, MetaMask. And I remember calling him, and I'm like, dude, that's too complicated. I don't want anything to do with this. And I don't have access to that wallet again, but so that was Jonas. And I also remember when I back then invited you to exhibitions, he was always like, wait, I first have to ask the DAO, so the board. And I think that was in 2018, so why did you come up with that idea, and how has that changed over the years?
So first, for people who are not familiar, Jonas Lund Token is a decentralized autonomous organization. Basically, as a holder, you get voting shares in my artistic practice. Should I participate in this exhibition? Should I go on a sabbatical? Should I do this and this and this and this? And it started in 2018. There's a long story and a short story. Maybe I'll do the short story.
You can speak a bit, I guess. And it's also very entertaining.
Okay. I have permission to go on a monologue, so bear with me and interrupt me whenever. So basically, Jonas Lund Token was sort of the end destination in my exploration into like value production in the art world. My theory was that, going back in time. So art is whatever the art world says is art, is the default theory for defining what's art, based on George Dickey from the 1960s and Arthur Danto. Also means art world is in charge of determining what's relevant, important, good art, and what's irrelevant and bad art. And it's a super hierarchical power structure, and there's no objective way of determining what's good and bad. It's pure subjective sort of speculation in a strange networked system. So there's no consensus until there is a consensus, and then it's great art. So my theory with Jonas Lund token was, if I can stake my board with the top influential people in the art world, and they make the decision to say this is good art, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It becomes good art because the people who decide what's good and bad decided it's good. So it's a sort of a hack of the value production mechanism in the art world. Did it work out like this? Maybe. It was, I think there's like 250 token holders of some of significant influence in the art world. So it's sort of there. It's a long-running project. It's been going for 8 years already, which is crazy. It's very dormant because it's not really a decentralized autonomous organization. It's a very like centralized non-autonomous organization, meaning that it's just me who's doing everything, and I get busy and I don't have time. So I'm sorry to the token holders. Also, the proposal was that it's a token, so it gains or loses value as my career performs better or worse. So you can then also profit, which is again making visible the corruption of the art world, because that's how it works, right? Collectors on museum boards vote to put their artists in the next exhibition because the value of the work increases, and then you can sell it in the secondary market and make a profit, or it looks good. So that was the theory. In relation to autonomy, I think it is interesting. There's been some interesting moments with the Jonas Lund token, such as asking the board whether I should go on a sabbatical. I really wanted to go on a sabbatical. The board declined it because...
It was the worst time possible, my friend.
Yeah,
that was during the NFT hype. He asked the board, and I was sweating because we've worked on stuff together.
Yes, so it was rejected. Yeah. And it was a clear separation on the token holders. Like my friends voted for sabbatical, all the like art world professionals voted against sabbatical. Like you gotta keep on working, keep the grind going. So I think, and then there was questions to the board where I should be based, in what city to live, and things like that. So of course it's like, okay, so I could just ignore the decision of the board, but I think then the whole thing collapses because it's a commitment of trust, right? So I think.
But they really had a say in what you create for an exhibition. So can you quickly guide us through one of those proposal processes? Because you really said I've been invited, and then the whole process started.
Yeah, so the principle was, okay, so all the decisions, one notable example was the show curated by Office in Part at Kindle Contemporary 2019, Behind the Screen. The board is consulted whether I should participate or not. I think all of those proposals were later just automated because the board would always vote to participate regardless. So I'm just like, and then I submit the board with 4 different options for what should be in the show. Like, okay, we're gonna make work like this, should it be like this, should it be like this? And then the board votes, and then the work gets materialized. So essentially just following the board's decision what the work should be, but giving them options. So like, okay, there are 4 different options you pick. Which basically then means that for all the exhibitions, I had to make 4 different artwork, 4 different installation options, and then the board picks one. So it's like 4 times the amount of work. So it's not autonomous at all. It's really just centralized, non-autonomous, work-intensive, heavy labor, non-organization. Right?
Yeah, and as a curator, I also couldn't say much, have much of a say, right? I was always like, oh, what do we get?
You get what you see is what you get. Yeah.
But I remember once we got the cute animals I wanted on the Jonas Lund token, so that was nice. So yeah, speaking about the art market, then I guess it's great to continue with art blocks, because that was, I think, initially idea when we started thinking about the blockchain and NFTs and so on, that we somehow find an alternative model to what Jonas just described, right? The traditional art world, as it's been called. So, and I think Art Blocks was at the forefront. You're still here. You're exhibiting also at 010 by Art Basel. So how did I mean, you're not Snowfro, but you definitely can speak about that. So how did that start? And then also, what has changed significantly over the past? It's already been 6 years. Crazy.
Almost 6 years, yeah. This fall, it'll be 6 years of Art Blocks, 6 years of kind of constant experimentation, the ups and the downs with the markets, and we're still here. We're proud to be continuing to build and evolve and work with artists. Although one very important change at the end of last year that we released, that we set up was called the Art Blocks 500, which is kind of putting a bow around the first 500 projects that Art Blocks released, that artists have released on the Art Blocks platform, just kind of as a way to acknowledge the past 5 years and the amazing work that's been released. Jonas's work is one part of the Art Blocks 500. And yeah, it's just kind of a way to put museum glass over the past 5 years. A lot has changed since the launch of the Chromie Squiggle on day 0. We kind of wanted to just acknowledge, draw a line in the sand and say, humans did an amazing work the first 5 years. Creativity is there. We kind of want to lock it in place. And now in the age of AI and multiple chains and a much bigger community, we kind of wanted to take those restrictions off. We had very kind of tight restrictions around what went into Art Blocks Curated or what went into what we're now calling Art Blocks 500. Has to be code-based, it has to be on-chain, it has to fit certain things, has to be approved by the committee, has to be curated. And now it's almost like all bets are off, and now we can kind of experiment with new tech. We've launched a handful of new tools and technologies. That's what excites me personally is delivering tools and infrastructure and kind of a pathway to the community for these amazing artists, set them up for success. And the company has definitely kind of been with the market in terms of ups and downs, but thankfully we're still here and we can continue to iterate, we can continue to build and work with artists to create amazing tools and experimentation, especially now in the age of AI. Our company is really strong with using agents and AI autonomy in our daily lives, in our daily practice, our daily work. And we're starting to experiment, okay, what does it look like when the artists build autonomous agents that run with the platform or on the platform. In the past, everything's been very curated, and we're starting to kind of talk to artists and talk to collectors around what does it mean to maybe create more of an open environment, an open ecosystem. So it almost feels like, even though we've been here for almost 6 years, we're kind of a startup again, where we're thirsty for experimentation and for new users, and we're just excited to help so many artists kind of deliver their vision. So that's kind of what gets us going.
The interesting part about art blocks is also, it's generative art. So basically, the artist writes code, as you just described. There's a curatorial process, or for Curated there has been. I was on that board. I remember receiving many emails and then having to do stuff. So there was actually really work involved, and there were people selecting, which read many emails. And but the interesting part is, like, the usual process is that also changed with Jonas and the token and the DAO. Usually an institution or a curator invites an artist to an art fair, then they see the paintings beforehand, the collector knows what they get, and Art Blocks changed that, right? The artist set up a system, then collectors pressed the mint button and they got something. And it usually were like big collections, 1,000, 10,000, so that also changed agency and autonomy, no?
Yeah, it certainly did. The vision for Art Blocks really goes back to the early days of CryptoPunks and Snowfro, where Eric Calderon, our CEO, had the vision for Art Blocks even before releasing it in 2020, kind of way back in 17 and 18, where, inspired by the CryptoPunks algorithm, which led to creation of 10,000 tokens, envisioning the same thing but for art and where an artist maybe has a little bit more say into the algorithm itself and potential outputs. And as many of you know, an artist has a general idea of what can come out of the algorithm, right? They know the percentage of things that look this way, a percentage of things that go that way. They can establish kind of the framework of potential realities, potential outputs, but it's really up to the blockchain gods, the minter, when the collector hits the mint button, that really it's out of their hands, it's out of the artist's hands. So there's a bit of autonomy just in the output itself, and there have been a lot of really interesting kind of things that have come out of the minter that even surprised the artist. So it's really interesting to think, even without, you know, quote unquote AI agents and the autonomy there, that we're able to see some more interesting outputs, some emergent properties that or collaborations that come out of the minter. That's one bit of autonomy, just the mere fact that generative art exists on chain, and it doesn't really exist until the collector hits the mint button. We're also working on something that maybe kind of twists that a little bit. We call it post-params. It's just the ability for, it's more rules, and it's up to the artist and how they want to implement them. But an artist is able to say, hey, even after the mint, I want to allow the collector to change a certain variable of the algorithm. So I want to make, you know, change the palette from palette A to palette B. And in some cases, one of our first releases with post-params was D-Dust. And that allowed the collector to choose which output, which palette, which color palette existed in their work of art. So after they mint it, they can choose their favorite color palette. And we've seen some really interesting things. The artists kind of take that over. They can make rules around, okay, not the collector, but the artist. So myself as an artist, I'm able to make changes to the algorithm down the road, not just color palettes, but it could be anything. So it's again playing with, or maybe it's, you know, a random smart contract based on the price of Ethereum that day, changes the output, changes the visuals. So again, it's just one extra lever that the artist can use in their practice to create, you know, there's kind of life of the artwork beyond the mint, which has been really interesting, and we're seeing the early phases of that right now.
So it's basically also co-creation. And speaking about authorship, we have one of the two people, I guess, on stage with us who was thinking about systems and protocol art early. And there was a lot of talk about protocol art lately, also because of mainly because of the exhibition that opened in Venice during the Biennale. And there were so many people asking, what is protocol art? I went on Matt Dryhurst's nerves, who was one of the co-curators, and I was like, dude, explain that to me. And then I also reached out to Primavera. Here she is. Primavera can now explain to us what protocol art is, and that's also connected to the topic of agency, because the artist creates a system.
It's a very dangerous question to ask me, because I might end up with a 5 hours monologue. But
I have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. I will speak very fast. So basically, so the caveat is that there is no official definition of what we mean by protocol art, because it's in the making, and so we just have to be more vocal than the authors so that our definition comes in. My own very personal definition of protocol art is basically when the artist is focusing on creating something which is a protocol because it is something that can later be instantiated by other things or other people or other animals, which means that there is a distinction between a system, which is a smart contract, it's a system, it's a protocol, but it's not something that necessarily gets instantiated. But you can also create a smart contract that has, so Art Blocks is instantiating itself, because it's not the smart contract, it's more like the generative art type of things that create an instantiating system. But also we should not be stuck thinking of protocol art as things that are inherently connected with digital protocol, with blockchain or AI. We can go back in time, and there is actually quite some amazing and interesting protocol artists that were purely non-digital, whatever that means. So the archetypical example I will say is like Sol Levitt, where the artwork is the instruction, and those instructions are a protocol for authors, including the artist. The artist can be an instantiator of its own protocol, but there is a distinction between the artwork, which is the protocol, and the artwork and the multiplicity of artworks that get instantiated every time that protocol is created into something.
Sorry for interrupting. Some people might say, also as myself, but that's systems art. So what is new? What is the difference to what you've just described?
So the difference is like the protocol needs, to some extent, in order to be instantiatable in many forms, it needs to provide to the instantiator its own artistic discretion, so that the resulting work is always, from an authorship perspective, the resulting work is always a co-authorship or a asynchronous collaboration between the artist that has created the protocol and the artist that has instantiated the protocol. It happens that oftentimes they are the same people. So the protocol artist also needs to somehow instantiate the protocol for people to be able to experience it. But there is a separate layer. And the nice thing, in my view at least, and that's at least where my artistic practice is that the protocol artist actually is very lazy, and doesn't really, maybe just lazy or busy, I don't know. But the protocol artist doesn't have time to make as many works as they wish. And so luckily they make a nice protocol, and then all of a sudden you have like a lot of people, machines, whatever, that can instantiate it. But it's always a surprise, because I can never know how someone will instantiate the protocol. If I have a plantoid, well, someone else is going to make a plantoid. There is quite a lot of artistic discretion in how, and of course, therefore, the instantiator deserves its own authorship and copyright on the instance, but that instance inherits the aura of the protocol, and so that instance is actually contributing to expanding also the body of work of the protocol artist. And so every instance is a collaboration somehow, even though you don't even need to consultate the protocol artist, because every time you create a new work that is an instance of the protocol artist has a larger body of work that has been done. But if it's only like a very technical instruction and you don't leave artistic discretionary power to the instantiator, then it's not a protocol, then it's just a very basic set of instruction, and then you have like an assistant doing it. Whereas the protocol needs to be precise enough that you can recognize the pattern integrity in every instantiation, but needs to be broad enough to allow for whoever is instantiating it to embed their own creative discretion into choosing how to do it.
I liked the lazy part. I don't know if that's true for artists working with agents, if they can really be lazy. But I remember conversations with someone like Mario Klingemann, who created Bordeaux, and I think that was 2021. And the idea is somehow also like Jonas. It's basically trying to hack the system, right? The art world system, by adding more people to the table, distributing power, and so on and so on. So let me ask Jonas, are you lazy? And yeah.
It's good. One of my favorite quotes is from Linus Torvalds, who wrote the Linux kernel. He's a complicated Finnish man. He says he's lazy as a fox. So you're lazy, but not lazy because you can't be bothered, but you're lazy as a way of optimization. So you optimize through the path of like least resistance kind of thing. And I think, I mean, yeah, this type of optimization, automation is always such an illusion of like productivity gains. So you outsource a process to an agent or some other autonomous system, and it just gives you tons more work. And you feel like, oh, I'm being so productive, I'm getting so much done, but actually it's just an illusion. It's just like terminal logs scrolling by, and it looks cool, and you'll be like, wow, I'm getting so much stuff done. But then in the end of the day, you still have to review everything, and you have to check it, and you have to double check it, and then it's like...
So that was basically the exhibition you've done in Berlin with Office Impact, right? Where you started with an empty space, and I went there, I think, twice, and there were so many paintings in the end.
Yes.
So many.
I mean, so yes, I will briefly explain the show, and then we can talk about it. It's a show called Performance Review. It was an exhibition at Office Impact in Berlin. Closed some weeks ago. Starts empty. Assistants have been contracted as subcontractors. Everything is governed by an AI agent called Agent. The agent designates work specification tasks. So the assistants execute these, makes paintings, documents the paintings. The agent evaluates the paintings on a scoring from 0 to 100 in 6 different categories. And then makes a recommendation whether it should be signed and become a work of mine or be rejected and become nothing. And it was live streamed and everything is transparent. You can check the website, you see all the different things. Lots and lots and lots of works were produced and lots of assistants were there. It was a zero trust system. The employment contract was like 16 paragraphs long. The assistants are a bit like a mix of an Uber driver, artist assistant / working in a coffee shop with a really terrible boss. They would be continuously performance reviewed after each work session, and then the agent would decide who shows up for work tomorrow based on their score. Total dystopian vision of the future. It's like, this is where we're going, it's not gonna be a good time. And most of the time, they make paintings because the art world is obsessed with static works that hangs on the walls. And I was joking with Primavera earlier, this like, if only we could just make flat work that hangs on the wall, and it's like all of our problems are solved. Nothing to install, nothing to configure, nothing to connect. You just like 2 nails, finished. You know? So that's the dream, but it's very hard to make good works that hang flatly on the wall. It's very difficult. So then we build systems instead to just, make the network around it be interesting. Also, I'm honestly not that interested in static things that hangs on the walls as a default. I'm much more interested in making the system and looking at the consequences of all of these things. But the conclusion of the autonomousness of setting up such an exhibition and outsourcing all the decisions to an agent, does it give me more or less work is the final question to verify and like sort of evaluate this. And it 100% gives you more work, like way more work than just making flat stuff that hangs on the walls. So it's an illusion.
Sorry to hear.
Yeah.
Primavera, you have to adapt that thing. So I just
I'm not going to use lazy anymore.
Yeah, you can't, I'm sorry. Yeah, 5 minutes. So I would say last question. And just briefly, as an addition to that, I recently wrote an article for Spike magazine about the post-artist, and my idea was basically also starting with artists like Jonas, or thinking about Primavera, thinking about systems, or also art blocks, like basically how does the artist extend itself. I didn't think about artists being lazy, but also getting more people involved, and in this case technology in the form of AI. So how do you think about the role of the artist in the future when, I'm sorry, that's a big one. How do you think about the role of the artist moving forward? Yeah, how does it change?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's actually just like from observation, I guess. there is some artists that definitely are not seeing AI as a threat, and those are the protocol artists. That doesn't mean that everyone else necessarily sees it as a threat, but definitely I have yet to meet a protocol artist that sees AI as like, oh my God, this is something that is gonna eat my job. And the reason I think is because protocol artists, they operate upstream. And so AI is this wonderful instantiator, even though they're a bit annoying sometimes and you need to supervise them. But basically, as AI gets better and better and better and better at doing many different things, what the AI does is still the instance, right? And so as a protocol artist, you just always have to go a bit more upstream, and therefore creating that system which use AI in order to do things that otherwise you will have to do without the AI. But as long as you don't play on the finite piece, on the actual, making the flat thing on the wall, you just go upstream. It's like, okay, I don't want to do the flat thing on the wall because a plotter or an AI can do it for me. What is it that I make, and how do I make the upstream work actual an artwork, because that's part of the work. And to be honest, and I guess it depends on the preference, but for me it's much more fun to go upstream and to design artistic and creative protocol that can be instantiated by AI or by human. To be honest, it changed little, or by AI giving commission to humans. So you always have the human also at the downstream. But basically, to me, I have a hard time seeing AI as anything else but as a wonderful opportunity to make even more complex and creative protocols than as something that will displace the artist. And if the artist is displaced on a layer, then you go upstream and you become a protocol artist, and then you're fine.
That's beautiful. Jonas?
Future of the artist in 1 minute.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was joking earlier when I introduced myself to all the friends I know already. I said I'm Jonas Lund from Jonas Lund Studios, CEO, CFO, CTO, head of marketing, head of production,
Intern.
Someone
needs to do the work.
So it's the one. So that's the current state of the artist. I don't think any of those roles can be successfully at the current state, at the current level, fully handed off to autonomous agents. Now, since the show in Berlin, my agent is CC'd very often in all my emails and communications, just so I can sort of offload some of the responsibility of when I LLM write my emails, I can claim it was the agent who did it. So it's there's always about the responsibility and the culpability. So future of the artist as Pace Gallery cuts 50 artists from their gallery, and everything is shrinking, and there's going to be a global oil crisis, although there's a peace deal today apparently. I think it's not looking great, but the digital art section of the art world is supposedly growing, so that's good, I think. Thank you.
Lovely. We're hopeful and optimistic. We have less than 1 minute. You have 30 seconds.
We're hopeful and optimistic as well at Art Blocks. For us, autonomy was never really the frontier. What's really interesting is more and more tools to help artists kind of realize their vision and deliver it to an audience of collectors. So it's just more tools in the tool set for artists, and we're continuing to build and continuing to open up a lot of our tooling for artists to continue to experiment with or without agents.
Thank you so much for being here, and have a nice rest of the day. See you around. If you have more questions, we're here.